There you go.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to tonight's.
What if I have to turn it up or something?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Welcome to the April 21st, 2021 meeting of the Oxford, Ohio Board of Zoning Appeals. Tonight's meeting is held virtually under Ohio House Bill 404 and in compliance with the Ohio Open Meetings Act. Sam Perry, would you do a roll call of the board members for the record, please?
Yes, I will, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Mr. Ames,
I am here.
Mr. Allison,
Here.
Ms. Ruminaire,
Here,
Mr. Hazeman,
Here.
and Mr. Schnipper.
Here. First order of business is that we have to approve the minutes of the February 17th, 2021 meeting. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second? And seconded. Any objection to the approval? Without objection, the minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is under old business for BZA case 2020-04. This is a continuation, meaning an extension of our previous approval. Ben Mazur, do we have to go into an adjudication hearing for this?
Apologies, I got myself unmuted now. So yeah, it would be my recommendation that we do go into an adjudication. Certainly, Sam, if you feel differently as far as this goes, I would also defer to you. But I think it makes sense to do that for purposes of the record.
That's fine. Sam, any objection to that?
No, I'm not predicting any real substantial new evidence, but I think it's a good safeguard to go ahead and do it that way.
Sounds great. Need a motion to enter into adjudication.
I so move.
Thank you, Dan. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mel. Any opposition? Without opposition, we're in adjudication. Sam, you going to present?
Yes, sir.
State your name and job title for the record, please.
Sam Perry, City of Oxford Community Development Director.
And you got your right hand up. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
Yes, I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. This is a request from Mr. Bob Briggs on behalf of Mark Wiseman and the owners of the Brick Street property. You may recall, those of you that were in attendance, and I believe you all were, back in July of 2020, there was a request for a side setback variance for an extension, a vertical extension of the patio and canopy area that's been titled the Sky Deck for the Brick Street Bar and Restaurant. And what has happened since that time within the COVID pandemic has been, the work has not begun, but the building permit has been applied for, approved, and issued. But the way the code reads, the work has to begin and a permit has to be issued within that 6-month time frame. So one aspect of that was met. The other aspect of the work beginning was not met. And so in order for them to begin work, they need an extension. So, you know, we are bringing this to you on their behalf with the understanding that there's really not any major changes in the scope of work. And there hasn't been any changes in the code. There hasn't been any changes in the facts. There was a slight change to the work that I would say was within the scope of the variance approval and the footprint, which was the addition of a small bar on the Sky Deck, which was not presented at the time. There's no new roof. There's no horizontal expansion. So staff's belief is that because there's not any major changes of the scope, that this board does have the power to extend the variance approval and not go through a brand new application and hearing with notification to all of the adjacent property owners and newspaper publication. Although if there's something that you see differently or have questions to ask, we're certainly open to answer that. And of course, Mr. Wiseman, Mr. Riggs are both in attendance as well.
Thank you, Sam. Board, do you have any questions for Sam?
Was the original plan to do this work in over December and January? I think I remember Mark saying that.
Yeah, well, we had hoped,
Hey,
but
Mark,
the,
Mark.
Oh.
We'll get,
Oh,
we need to
sorry.
get you sworn in and under oath and all that good news. So I think her question was addressed to Sam. So since we're in
Oh,
adjudication, let's
okay.
let Sam answer it for right now, please.
Yeah, sorry.
Sam, can you answer that for us?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. I believe that was the understanding that was presented. It would be done. It was presented as part of a pandemic response to provide more square footage and to create some activity and some work that would be during a downtime. That did not happen during a break. I'm not sure what all the reasons were, but that's all I can offer at this time.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Anybody else have questions for Sam? Okay, without any other questions. Mr. Riggs or Mr. Wiseman, would you like to testify in this case?
yes,
State your name and title for the record, please.
I'm Mark Wiseman, owner of Brick Street.
Thank you, sir, and raise your right hand for me. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Yeah, I just want to elaborate on Sam's response. So once we got the approval through the Board of Zoning, we went through the permitting process, and obviously with COVID, there's a lot of back and forth, and we got the permit. We applied for the permit within 3 months, I think early October, and we were approved in the middle of July, hoping the process would move quicker, but it didn't. And ultimately, we got the permit, I think a couple days after the quote unquote period expired per, the Board of Zoning. So in other words, we couldn't start the project without a permit or we would have been in violation. So that's just a little more clarification around the timing.
Okay, thanks. Do you have anything else to add? Any
I
questions?
don't, Bob, Bob Riggs, do you have anything if you
Well,
want?
Bob, we'd have to go through the same process.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
Sure.
Okay.
you can go. I'll add a couple things. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Anybody else have any questions for Mark Wiseman? Okay, thanks. Mr. Riggs, would you like to testify?
Yes, please.
State your name and title for the record, please.
Bob Riggs, pre-construction manager at Concord Construction Group.
Thank you, sir. Raise your right hand for me. And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Just to add on to what Mark and Sam were saying, we got the permit right on I believe it was the 60-day time frame, and then in the construction process, once you get a permit, then you start buying out contracts for the parts and pieces of the work that have to be done, and that usually takes 2 to 3 weeks to get those subcontractors under contract. By that time, there was no time left in the break of Miami's break or time during the summer to get that, or the winter break to get that done. So we decided to go ahead and do it for this summer when school's out, and we've now been able to get everything set up, ready to go. So with this approval, then we can go ahead and get started and get it done for over the summer break. You're muted, Michael.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
You're welcome.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Riggs? Okay, thank you. Board member, I need a motion to re-enter regular session. Come on, one of you can do it.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any objection? Without objection, we're back in regular session. Discussion or motion, please.
I have a question for the board members really only. I mean, I approve this, I think I approve this extension because
Did not.
of the timing. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
The question is that my memory of this petition in July was that a lot of the changes had to do with the COVID-19 and creating a new space so that there'd be more social distancing. Well, apparently over the summer and in the fall, a lot of the world is thinking we don't need social distancing anymore. So is the whole logic for the project a little shakier. The reason I'm unsure about this question is I don't necessarily think I want to, I don't know, do we want to go back and can we? I don't know what to do with that question, but I don't know if others thought about that too.
So Kate, if
I understand what you're saying, but I think that this is simply a hearing to decide whether we want to grant an extension. This is not a hearing to re-adjudicate the variance request.
Correct, yeah. I get you.
So Mike,
Yes, Chris.
so Kate, you and I both voted against this. And so you wouldn't be surprised to find that I'll vote against the extension. And I'll also point out that, you know, we know that there's a new law in the state of Ohio, which will probably eliminate the restrictions in June. The President of the United States is saying July, and Dr. Fauci is saying late summer, early fall. So really, by the time this is built, the basis upon which the request was made would no longer be valid, at least in my mind.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from. Even after the pandemic is over, I think it's going to be a plus, and then it's going to be able to generate some more business for a local business.
I don't disagree with that, but I think coming to BZA to try to come up with something that doesn't exist anywhere in the code is a mistake, unless there's some overriding consideration.
Valid point. Valid point. But again, you know, if the majority of the board tonight votes to decline an extension, then they would have to come back before the board for another attempt at a variance. But and correct me if I'm wrong, they cannot do that for a year from their original petition. So I think that we need to stick to the point tonight, which is whether we're going to grant an extension or not. And I think that that's really what we need to stick to. So Sam, you got something? You're muted.
I was just going to add that I don't think that they would preclude them from coming back for a year, because not allowing an extension is not the same thing as denial of the original variance.
Okay.
So I think they could. You know, that's my take on it.
Well, to get to that point, I hope we don't have to find out the hard way. If the extension is not granted, then we'll cross that bridge. So tonight, let's decide whether we want to go ahead with the extension. And Mark, I can't let you back in. We're in session with the board members only.
Wait, so can I just have clarification on that? If we vote against the extension, then we would adjudicate the request again.
We
right?
would not do that tonight. They would have to reapply for the variance, and then we would hear that case.
All right, I got it.
Okay. Anything else from the board members? Can I get a motion?
I'll make the motion, Mike.
Thank you, Roger.
In the case of the extension of our original, I'm going to make the motion that we do extend it based on the fact that there were extenuating circumstances getting the issues and getting the construction process started within the 6 months.
Thank you, Roger. Is there a second? Dan, you're muted. I hope you said you seconded.
I did. I second.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we got a motion and a second to extend the variance. And Mr. Perry, would you do a roll call vote for us, please?
Yes, sir, I will. Start with Mr. Allison.
No.
Ms. Ruminaire,
No,
Mr. Hazeman,
Yes.
Mr. Ames,
Yes,
Mr. Schnipper.
Yes, the extension is granted. Mr. Riggs, Mr. Wiseman, thanks for attending tonight. Good luck with your project.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is a piece of new business. Board members, if you recall, at our February meeting, there was a question about how the property in question would affect the adjacent property because they were going to buy 4 feet off it. And nobody quite knew how that would affect it. And to try to avoid that in the future, I had some discussion with staff. And Sam, I think you've come up with a good solution to help minimize or eliminate that. So if you could take it.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this actually goes back several years, this idea of when a variance is submitted. Sometimes there is a staff review ahead of the review with the original submittal, and sometimes there's not. So what we would like to do and what we plan to do and what we're starting to inform applicants is that we're going to require a preliminary zoning review or a denied building permit before we accept and process a variance application. So the question came up on a previous case, how would another property be affected when there's a trading of land or a lot split? And there wasn't a lot of evidence able to be submitted. And so we looked at the code and found that the code would actually support, and it does support, not processing a variance application until a building permit has been denied. So that's what we're doing moving forward. We've talked to the law director about it, and I think that would have actually helped give some more background for the previous case. We did work that one out without having to come back to the board, but moving forward, we would like to have a little bit cleaner process. You may recall Morning Sun Road, there was a corner lot. I think it maybe came to the board twice. Some of you that have been on the board longer, you may have seen the same properties reappear more than once. And so our hope is that we would not discover the need for additional variances during the hearing process, but we would try to know those in advance by having a more complete review. So whether that's a sit down with the city staff that generates some kind of a written letter, or it's a building permit that someone who's unfamiliar with the zoning code that's not from the community or not familiar with the community's rules, they would have experienced a denial of a building permit. And then within that, they would get a written statement saying what their options would be. So those are the pathways that we would traditionally have for before the zoning board takes the case. So hopefully that will give you some background and make you better prepared. Although we think things are working very well, we're always looking for ways to improve.
Thank you, Sam. And trust me, we appreciate the job that you do and your staff do, and we appreciate you taking on one more item to make it as clean as possible. Okay, next on this, we've got an adjudication hearing for BZA 2021-03 for 224 East Vine Street. Before we begin, I want to disclose that Mr. Kellums is a customer of mine, and that in and of itself does not constitute a conflict of interest. To be a conflict, the relationship has to be substantial and ongoing. And while he's been a customer of mine for quite some time, the annual revenue is very small, only a few $100s. So I don't have a problem in hearing the case, but if anybody on board, staff or legal does prefer that I recuse, if you'd say so, I will recuse myself.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the notification of the relationship, but I do not think it's substantial. Therefore, I don't think you should have to recuse yourself.
Thank you, sir.
I agree.
Thank you. Okay, well, having said that, let's go ahead and get into the adjudication hearing. Do I have a motion to enter into adjudication?
So move.
Thank you, Ms. Verminier. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Dan. Any objection? Without objection, we're now in adjudication. Sam, again, you're going to present for the city.
Yes, sir, I will.
And please state your name and job title for the record.
Sam Perry, City of Oxford Community Development Director.
And raise your right hand for me. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
Yes, I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you, everyone. And I will give some credit to Zachary Moore, who actually prepared this. He wasn't able to join tonight, feeling under the weather. So, and he did work with Mr. Kellums on this in advance. So I will share my screen. Okay. So Mr. Dave Kellums is the owner of this property that's zoned R3MS, 224 East Vine Street. Single family dwelling, and the proposal is to add an additional unit onto the building. And there are 3 variances that have been requested as a result of that proposal. This map shows the location, 224 East Vine Street near the intersection of University Avenue. It is adjacent to an alley, which is not uncommon in the mile square. You can see that the orientation of the building actually appears that it faces the alley just because of the way the building is shaped, but it actually does front on Vine Street. The zoning map, you can see that the property is zoned R3MS, and you'll learn a little bit later that it was previously zoned R1. Across the street to the south is R2MS. You may recall that R3MS is single, 2, and 3 family are the allowed uses. And then R2MS across the street is single and 2 family. Family being a family of unlimited size or a group of 4 unrelated. Bird's eye view or oblique view, looking to kind of the northwest, you can see the building that's highlighted. And the area in question is going to be onto the east side or the right of your screen. And what's proposed is to remove the porch that's there and replace it with a dwelling unit that's attached. Another side view looking to the east, you can see the alley in the foreground, and then Vine Street to the right. It gives you an idea of the bulk of the building. The addition would actually be on the back side of what you see here on the east side. And so you can see the parking and the garage that's accessible. There is parking available in the garage and in the driveway off the alley. And you'll learn later that the mile square does encourage that alley access and required if it's available. Another view similar to what you saw before, you can see the proximity of the building to the newer building that is in context there, and you'll learn a little bit more about that later. And what is proposed is to remove this porch and add an addition onto the side. And you can see that it's very close because it is on the rear property line, the existing building. The new, as you'll see, would be set back further than the current building is. Here's some photos of the existing conditions, a little bit closer view. On the top left, you can see this is how it currently looks, and you can see there's a wide yard room for some development. And this is the section that would be removed and have a dwelling unit added, a 2-story addition. On the lower left, you can see the parking accessibility from the alley, and on the lower right, another view. And then on the upper right is the view from Vine Street sidewalk. So the zoning provisions, this is straight out of the code on the setbacks, so front, rear, and side, and we'll focus in on the rear setback requirement or rear yard depth requirement of 35 feet. And the request is to have an addition that would not comply with that, but would be set back 23.7 feet, which is actually set back a little bit further than the original review that we did with Mr. Kellums. Next is regarding the accessibility for a curb cut. As I mentioned, the mile square code prefers and mandates, if it's available, access from the alley. Actually, I skipped over. This one is referring to the lot coverage, not the alley access. I apologize. So 45%, which was an increase from the previous code in 2017. It was increased to 45%. The proposal is a slight increase over that maximum of 45 to 45.7. There was a survey which helped to validate that, and you'll see some information about that in the staff report that's written. So back to the curb cuts that I kind of skipped over there earlier. The curb cuts for driveways are strongly discouraged from the street. No curb cuts are allowed if an alley is present. Alleys must be utilized as much as possible to provide automobile access. So it's kind of a way of restating the same thing over and over again. So we'll highlight that middle section. No curb cuts are allowed if an alley is present. So with the addition being not accessible by the alley, you'll see that the proposal is to provide the parking access, the off-street required parking access from the street instead of the alley. So the overhead view you should have seen in your packet shows the addition in the gray shading, which is set back further than the original proposal. And you can see the shadow of the existing open porch that would be removed completely, and the addition be set back further from the rear property line than it currently is. And then in the lower right-hand side of the drawing, you can see the proposed parking area access from Vine Street. You can ignore the label for 10-foot utility easement. That's referring to something that's not part of the parking. But you can see the rectangle that is proposed for the parking area. The parking would be completely behind the sidewalk to have 2 spaces, which is required to have off-street parking that's truly off-street. The rear setback for the existing building, which is not changing, not proposed to change, is right on the property line. There was actually a pretty complex case about this about 9 years ago, right around the time I started working for the city of Oxford, actually, where there was a lot split that had been previously approved, or a lot consolidation that had been previously approved but not recorded. And so a building permit was approved that resulted in an encroachment over a property line, which the owner thought wasn't there. So what had happened, this was the previous owner, there was another project proposed and built that resulted, actually previous to that, a variance denial because of that property line issue and the encroachment and the existence of 2 buildings on 1 lot. And so that was mediated and eventually approved. And as part of that, some of this building was actually removed in order to comply with the 3-foot change in property line. So that's just a little bit of a history on that. We don't believe that that actually affects the merits of this case, but it is some history that might be interesting to you, since it was a BZA action that involved the adjacent property to the north. The addition of the porch was approved by the board in 1987. The porch that is now proposed to be removed. And so you can see the difference in the time at the lot line that has since changed by 3 feet. And this is the little bit more of the case history on the lot consolidation that was not recorded, that resulted in a building permit that was approved without the recording of the lot consolidation. Also historical information. More recently, the 2012 case, which is referenced in the staff report that you should have seen. You can see here the encroachment. So this portion, this kind of a leg or L, was the portion that was actually removed, and then the lot line shifted so that the building would be completely on the property. And it's kind of a middle ground that was reached through the process, which allowed then the building to the north to proceed and be built. And you can see the variation there and the property lines. Again, not completely relevant to the case at hand, but historical information. The site plan that you've already seen. And this is one of the variance requests for the rear setback. You can see the blue arrow shows the minimum required rear yard setback, and then the red arrow is what's actually proposed. And you can see the difference between what is there currently and what is proposed. However, I will say it is a 2-story addition versus the open porch there, which is a 1-story feature. Lot coverage is minor. And our finding was that it was actually 46.3%, not 45.7. Zachary did those calculations and came up with those, and very, very detailed analysis here. And you can see what's in blue, what's shaded is to be removed, and then what's yellow would be the new improvements or impervious areas, if you will. The curb cut variance, as I mentioned earlier, the zoning code does not permit a new curb cut on the street because of the existence of an alley. And so this is one of the requests that you're being asked to allow a variance from, so that a new curb cut could be created. The new curb cut would essentially also remove an on-street parking space, because in order to have access to a driveway, there has to be no on-street parking allowed in that area in order to access the driveway. So it's still a net gain of one parking space. And even though there were no police chief comments or police department comments in the staff report, we did have some communication with the police department who did not have any negative comments to that, even though it did take away one on-street parking space, or will. And then here you can see where the curb cut would be located. That would cut through this area near to a next driveway you'll see on the next slide. Actually, maybe one other. This is a rendering drawn by Mr. Kellums showing the two-story addition. You may have seen some other drawings and some work from Mr. Kellums, who's done several projects in the Mile Square. You can see how the roof slopes are consistent with the Mile Square design guidelines. The window design with the vertical ratio, instead of being wider, they're taller than they are wide. So it does meet the Mile Square guidelines. And you can see the attachment of the roof to the structure. It would be stepped out a little bit farther toward the street, a few feet than the current footprint of the building, but would comply with the front yard setback. And the photo of the current building, and you can get an idea of how the two-story addition would fit in relationship to the existing building. The decision criteria that we go through. This property is already an actively used property. We do find that it can generate a reasonable return without the variance. But it is important to note that the property the zoning was changed from R1MS to R3MS within the past few years. So that does imply that there's potential for additional dwelling units if all the other codes are met. It's not a guarantee, but we do want to point that out. Whether or not the variance is substantial, there are three. As far as lot coverage, we don't believe it is, because it's around 1%. The rear yard setback, it is actually a decrease, at least from a top-down view. You may not find that it is when looking at the two-story addition, but we felt that that criteria was met pretty clearly for all of the variances, particularly because of not having negative comments from the police department on the curb cut as well. Essential character of the neighborhood, we could look at curb cut, we can look at Mile Square design guidelines, we can look at lot coverage. Probably the curb cut and the rear yard setback would be the ones you should focus on. Maybe the curb cut is the most impactful with regard to accessibility and parking and street presence. That's a big part of the zoning code as far as how the property is viewed from the street and the public right of way. However, we still think it is supported by the code for criterion C. Criterion D, governmental services. There were no comments. However, I did mention on-street parking is a governmental service. It's public parking. So there is an impact there, but there were not any negative comments about that from city departments. Criterion E, about the knowledge of the zoning restriction. I think the most applicable thing here has to do with the changing of the zoning district since the time of the property owner's ownership, from being upzoned, if you will, from R1MS to R3MS. Criterion F, whether the predicament can be obviated through some other method. This property is quite wide when it comes to Vine Street. So there is some opportunity for construction. It does seem like there's a gap there between the buildings. The parking aspect, without removing some of the building to have access off of the alley or completely demolishing the building and starting from scratch, there really isn't any other options for adding additional off-street access. for parking accessibility. Spirit and intent, our belief is that it is supported because of the upzoning and the setback that is provided between the two buildings. Even though there is a rear yard setback, the addition is providing the spacing between the buildings that the zoning code envisions, with access to light and air and general openness. So there's many different zoning code requirements that kind of all feed into that overall purpose of having a predictable pattern and spacing between buildings, not just for public safety, but also for a certain kind of neighborhood character, so that the buildings and the properties are not too densely packed with each other. So with that, we don't have any other evidence or findings. We believe that there's sufficient evidence to grant all three variances. Happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Sam. Board members, do you have any questions for Sam?
I do.
Go ahead.
Okay, Sam, looking at the rendering, that the finish of the building is considerably different than what's there currently. Is that are they going to match as they're required to?
That would be a good condition to add if that was something that you couldn't learn from Mr. Kellums through his testimony. I think that would be a reasonable condition. However, I will say that the rendering is not, doesn't have a lot of detail.
Sure.
And so I think it'd be good to get that in testimony, and then potentially a condition if you're uncomfortable with it, because there is a mile square standard for it. So I think that would be clearly a condition that you could add if you felt there wasn't good testimony on it.
Okay, the other question I have has to do with the power lines that run between the two buildings, parallel with the alley, perpendicular to Vine Street. It showed the way the pictures you showed, it doesn't make it clear whether, how that's impacted, by the location of the curb cut driveway, or the, whether it's too close to the building and therefore would create a potential hazard for the fire department.
My sense is, Mr. Allison, that the power line is just a service line. And it would probably be
the one you're pointing at, not the one end of the house, but the one that's halfway down the fence.
okay. Yeah, that would probably be relocated. I don't recall if it's actually on the site plan. Yeah, I see it right here. So it looks like it's got plenty of spacing away from it. But I see that there's maybe a clearance issue here. So Mr. Kellums might be able to speak to that. It's a good question. We have had that issue come up where a building permit is approved and a clearance from a power line or a power pole is not well understood. And since the power company is not one of the building permit reviewers, sometimes there's after the fact issues. So I think Mr. Kellums would be a good one to answer on that.
All right. And are there any sewer issues, drains that might be in the way?
Couldn't answer anything on that.
Okay, I didn't see any, but okay, that's all.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sam. Anybody else? Kate?
Yes.
Yeah, I got a question for Sam. In our packet, there were two plans. There was an original plan and another plan. And I didn't know what the difference between them was.
Sure. Yeah, you may recall that when I gave some of the testimony, the original plan was closer to the rear yard line than what the new plan is. So originally it was around 16.5 feet, and now it's around 23.5 feet. So they did move it back away from the rear property line a little bit further.
Okay. Oh, I see it here. Right. Okay, I see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Anybody else?
Is there any way they can get another parking place in there? We're only going to pick up, we're supposed to pick up two. We're only going to pick up one, really. Is there anything that can be done to address that?
Again, I think that probably should be directed to Mr. Kellums. Sam, unless you want to add something to it.
I have nothing to add.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, you got to put your thinking caps on here because, and I'm going to throw Zach under the bus. I don't believe that his code citation for the curb cut is correct. I believe it should be 1143.07D 12, not 13A. So just keep that in mind if that is cited in your motion. Okay. And Ben, you can probably check that, or Sam, you can check it. But I've got it on the other screen right now. But please, if I'm wrong, say something.
Will do.
Thanks. Anybody else? Okay. Mr. Kellums, would you like to testify? First unmute
I'm on mute.
and state your name and title for the record, please.
Dave Kellums, owner of 224 East Vine.
And raise your right hand for me. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
I do.
Please proceed.
I'm really just open for questions. It seems like staff has more or less recommended it. I can answer any questions you guys have, especially Mr. Askew about it as far as the power lines and stuff.
Well, why don't we go through? Chris, you'd asked about the power line. Dave, would you want to address that?
The power line is roughly 4 feet off the house, corner of the house still. There's no windows anywhere close to that. Code is 3 feet.
Okay.
Okay. And I believe Chris also had a question about
Finish of the
Finish
met
and-
in the original.
and the sewer line.
This is just a rough drawing of the building. I mean,
Understood.
there's really no way for you to look at the last house I did. I mean, Zach caught me on the same thing. He says, well, this shows siding, but the last house I put siding and stone and shakes on it. I mean, as you can see from the picture of the house, I mean, it's got a fence across it. I mean, it looks pretty nice just the way it is, but you know, it'll be brought up to date and it'll be a showstopper.
Thank you, Dave. Anybody and asked about storm sewer, sanitary sewer? Any problems there, Dave?
Sewer's gonna run across 306 University, which I own also. Because
Okay.
that's the shortest and best route to run the sewer.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members have questions for Dave?
Yes.
Please
Is
go
there any
ahead.
way to increase the number of parking places?
The parking, yeah, if I got more lot coverage, I could add another stacked car space, which would be right along the building, which really isn't gonna affect anybody. I mean, nobody's gonna go out there and play in that spot anyway. As far as the alley, there's 2 spots on the alley. That's the only places I can get on the alley.
Right.
And I'm sure the board doesn't realize, there's no government services on the alley. Why, I don't know why they push all the parking to the alley when we don't get any service from the city. I mean, everybody wants you to park on the alley, but there's no service from the alley.
What do you mean, no service? I mean,
You get no snow plowing, you get no salt. Garbage is always a case. You get kids parking on the alley. I mean, if they park on the alley, they're gonna park in any green spot they can get in order to be off the street.
isn't there garbage pickup in the alley? But
There is-
snow, no,
There is garbage pickup in the alley,
okay, there is.
but that would be a Rumpke. So
Right.
it's not really
Right.
And there's no snow removal in the alley. Okay,
there's no ice removal, there's no salt.
Okay.
So you can't increase the parking places.
I can make a double stacked parking space, yes, to where there would be 3 spots off the street.
But if you did that, you would increase your lot coverage and wouldn't be considering this case tonight.
Correct.
Okay. Anybody else?
well, just to follow up on that, the current parking space allows two cars, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Okay, which is what's allowed, which is all that's required.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have anything for Dave Kellums? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kellums. Board members, I need to move a motion to re-enter regular session.
I so move.
Thank you, Dan. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Kate. Any objection? Okay, we're back in regular session. Board members, discussion or motion?
I have, the curb cut, as Sam mentioned, the curb cut is the thing that bothers me the most. Because it's so clear in the code that we shouldn't have curb cuts when we're near an alley. So I'm just trying to, I know everyone's been trying to figure this out, but there's a garage there. I can't figure out where the garage is on the house. Could the garage?
The garage is actually under the house, and the house that's there right now is on the property line. So from what I was looking at, there's no way to bring a driveway or anything else across that lot to bring it off of the alley. So
Yeah.
the only way we're going to have parking is with a curb cut variance.
It shows the garage on page 23 of our packet.
Okay.
And I assume the curb cut creates an issue with front yard coverage as well. Wouldn't the Vine Street be the front yard for the house?
It would. I'm thinking about what you just said.
And I think you're limited to something like 5% for front yard, which just accommodates a sidewalk.
I think you're right. But I don't know that the driveway in this situation would enter into the calculations. So
I guess
Look-
we'd have to ask Sam in whatever method that is required to do that.
Sam, can we get you to weigh in? I know it's a little out of normal, but could you offer some insight on that?
Yeah, the driveway is included in the front yard calculations. So if you felt strongly about how important the off-street parking was this close to campus, which I personally do not, but if you do, then yes, it could result in an increase of front yard coverage that would potentially exceed the limit of 5%. I know we did have an increase of front yard coverage. I think we went up to 10% in the past few months through Planning Commission to accommodate sidewalks and porches and those kinds of things that might happen. But I think what Mr. Hazeman was getting at is the net gain is still not as much because you're removing an off-street space in order to get access, removing an on-street space to get access to the off-street space. So I don't think the city staff is real concerned about that. But you know, if the idea of the location of the curb cut and the effect of that is intertwined with the actual provision of the spaces, and if that's important, then that's something that's, you know, for the board, that's worthy of discussion.
Thank you, Sam.
My sense on the parking is that even though you're only getting one additional parking space, you are reducing the congestion on the street because there's a new opening for whatever needs to happen.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
I'm still puzzling over the parking. Is there an option of going off the alleyway to the front of the house to parking in the front yard, or are there regulations against that?
No, I didn't see a way that we come off the alleyway.
There's just not enough room?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments? Before we go to a motion, Ben or Sam, did you double check me on that code citation? Sam?
114307D13A is correct. There may have been an incorrect reference somewhere else, but yeah, individual curb cuts for driveways are strongly discouraged. No curb cuts are allowed if an alley is present. So yeah, maybe you're looking at an old version of the code since there was an update within the past few months. I'm not sure.
I'm looking at the one from American Legal Publishing, and it's showing 2021-01.
sometimes those are off about 6 months because they don't do the updates dynamically.
Okay,
They only do them, I think it's either once a year or twice a year. And so as frequent as Oxford does zoning code changes, they're usually behind because we have a flat contract fee that we pay for a minimum number of updates, and zoning doesn't benefit from that as often as the changes we make. So yes, I think 114307 D13A is the correct citation for the curb cut requirement.
okay, that's fine. Then that saves Zach from being under the bus, and we'll throw American Legal Publishing under the bus.
Fair enough.
All righty. Board
Mr.
members,
Chair.
Ben, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies for interrupting. I did want to circle back, if I may, just real quick, before a motion and vote are cast, based upon your disclosure before this hearing began about your professional business. I did want, for purposes of protecting the record, I did just want to confirm there's really two pieces to this as to whether or not I would recommend that you recuse yourself on the voting. You've already covered the fact that you do not have a long-standing, significant, ongoing customer relationship with the applicant. That's correct?
Correct. The relationship is long-term. He's been a customer since, I believe, 2004. But the quantity of that relationship is very minor.
Okay, so it's not significant. The only other piece to that, Mr. Schnipper, I did just want to confirm for the record is whether or not, and I know this answer, but whether or not you expect to have any contingent financial interest in this decision or in this property. And by that, to clarify, I mean whether or not the landlord intends or is likely to pay for any services that you expect to perform on this property.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Schnipper. And then my legal counsel would just be obviously that you do not have to recuse yourself from this decision in this vote unless you feel otherwise.
Thank you, sir. Okay,
you,
board members, we
I
are.
have one comment. I don't want to make the motion yet, but this, as Sam mentioned, this project is in the area that was upzoned recently during some time I was on some city committee. And the whole point of that upzoning was to increase the density of housing in which college students might live in the area near the university. And that's exactly where this is. And this is actually sort of an ideal goal of that upzoning, to increase the density. So although I'm worried about the curb cut, I like the project in general and think I will approve of the variances. I just wanted to add that emphasis.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it.
If I might,
Okay, go ahead, Roger.
just to add on to what Kate just said, this seems to be the perfect lot location too, because of the width of the lot, the area that will be covered by the new construction. It's not going to change the overall effect of the neighborhood. It'll improve it.
Thank you, sir.
No, there's no shoehorning going on here.
No. All righty, can we get a motion, please? Don't everybody rush the microphone.
I nominate Roger to make the motion. He's so good at it.
Everybody else needs experience at this too, though, Kate.
I do have a slide, if someone would like to use the slide and take a run at it.
Okay, I'll try it then.
Okay.
Put up a slide so I can see what to say.
Will do. This might feel a little bit like school, but
this time she's a student instead of the teacher.
Yeah, right. That's fine with me.
That's going to feel different for.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What do you know? Oh, come back.
It's not
Okay.
open book.
So with regard to BZA 2021-03, being variances to section 1143.07C for minimum rear yard setback and maximum lot coverage, and 114307D 13A for an additional curb cut on a public street, I make a motion to approve, I hereby move that the board approve that motion.
And
For
you
the
would have,
following for the following reasons. The property will yield a reasonable return. And the variance will improve the property. The variance is not substantial because it's not a substantially large, high percentage, because the essential character of the neighborhood would not be substantially altered and adjoining properties would not suffer a substantial detriment, because the variance would not adversely affect delivery of government services, because the owner did purchase the property with knowledge of the zoning restriction, but the zoning has changed over the time that he's owned it. Also, the owner's predicament cannot feasibly be obviated through any other method because of just the size of the lot. And the spirit of the intent of the requirement would be observed and substantial justice done through this change.
thank you, ma'am.
I will second that motion.
Thank you, Roger. And any amendments or objections? Hearing none. Sam, would you do a roll call vote for us, please? A yes vote grants the variance as requested.
Just to confirm, all three at the same time? Ms. Ruminaire?
Yes,
Yes,
Okay.
all three at the same time.
I'll start with Mr. Hazeman,
Yes.
Mr. Ames,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Ms. Ruminaire,
Yes,
Mr. Snipper.
yes. Variances are granted. Mr. Kelms, good luck on your project. Okay, we got two quick things that I'd like to address before we adjourn for the evening. First, Sam and I have talked a little bit back and forth. Our meetings are held under House Bill 404, which, Sam, I believe expires July 1st. We chatted about that. And we ran into a similar situation at first of the year where House Bill 197 expired at the first of the year and was right up to the deadline before they issued the new legislation. So we're going to try and keep you informed on that. If 404 goes away, expires, and there is nothing to renew it, we will be back in live session in July. Mr. Mazur, do you have anything that you could add on that?
Mr. Chair, you're exactly right. It is set to expire July 1st. I have not heard any talk about extending that. It could certainly happen, and we'll keep you posted if we hear anything further about that. But right now, I think it's our expectation that that is going to expire and things will go back to being in person, absent some, 11th hour extension.
Thank you, sir. Sam, with that in mind, have you had any discussions on distancing, separation, anything that might be needed?
A little bit. And this might be an opportunity for me to kind of gauge the comfort level of the board members. My proposal to the city administration has been to install some plexiglass around the dais, and then have some expectation for applicants to, have distancing. That would reduce the requirement or potentially eliminate the requirement to have masks during the hearing process. So if that's something that you are all open to, and I don't need a response tonight, it'd be nice to have that within the next couple months, because the city really needs to make a policy decision about this. And I think your influence on that will have some effect, because the folks that'll be making that decision are on council most likely. And they don't perform the quasi-judicial function very often. So having your input on how that would work, and your involvement and willingness to participate in a live in-person meeting will be helpful. So we don't have hybrid meeting technology. We just don't have the staff or the software or the equipment. So our expectation is we're going to be all virtual or all in person. We're not going to do a hybrid meeting in the foreseeable future. So that would mean that the applicants, the staff, the board members, everybody's going to have to decide to do one or the other.
Thank you, Sam. Personally, I've been vaccinated. I got both doses. So as long as the other board members feel secure in a live meeting, I'm okay with it. But if anybody has an objection, forward that to Sam so that he can feed it up the food chain and we can act appropriately. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like
Fine.
to just, wait, I got a question for
ahead.
Sam or Ben on this. In the past, as you said, you're either all online or all face-to-face, and there's no, you can't you can't call in a vote. Is that still going to be the case? According to the state, like by the state rules, you could not call in a vote, or you could not come in on a telephone or other hybrid format.
Mr. Mazur, I think she's directing that question to you.
Do you know anything about that?
At least under the current, Ms. Ruminero, are you referring to the current House bill, or once things go back to normal under the Open Meetings Act?
Under the original Open Meetings Act, the normal Open Meetings Act.
So yes, you're correct. There is, under the Open Meetings Act, it does not really permit for hybrid format where some individuals will be in person and others will be communicating virtually. That's something that is permissible now under this current bill that we have because of the pandemic, and it's really a question of technology whether or not a municipality can accommodate a hybrid format. But under the Open Meetings Act, once this bill expires, it is necessary for everybody to be present in person under that law.
Okay,
Thank
yeah, that's all I need to know. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Okay, Lynn Taylor, you've been lurking in the background the whole meeting. I think everybody got the email that Lynn's going to retire at the tender age of 33. And the way I came up with that because she obviously started with the city when she was 18. She's been there 15 years. So you're only 33 years old, which is a really young retirement. But Lynn, we want to say thanks for all that you've done for us. It's been a pleasure. You've been very professional and very personable. And from this board, I want to wish you a very long and happy retirement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
excited.
We're gonna miss you.
You guys have been a pleasure, for sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, board members, it's been a good night. We've accomplished a lot. I appreciate your participation. Need a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any objection? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
All right,
you.
bye, guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye, Lynn.
Thank you.